Inside the stack of the membrane and the gasket is one way, and on the other side it's flipped. So you have to look at the diagram for the carb when you look at it. That's a really common thing. But the main one is there's a metering lever. So the metering lever is attached to a diaphragm, and as the engine is pumping fuel, it is opening and closing the fuel flow into the carb. That metering lever has a height setting. And when you get a kit, you're going to pop that off, throw it away, put the new one in. You've changed that. So you have to make sure to use a tool. It's like a Walbro shaped, it's a W, little brass part. I have one in the trailer, I didn't bring it. Just set that height. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look at the service manual. I'm just telling you that that's the thing you have to do when you replace the parts inside your car.
Who sells that the Walbro?
They're on Amazon, they're all over the place.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah, they're very cheap.
You have to get specific to the carb.
So the W-shaped one that's brass colored, the question is there a specific one for a specific carb? The W-shaped one has different parts, and they're labeled. It will say WB, WG, where you orient it with that little part to measure, to make sure that it's within spec.
Do you need one?
No, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah. So they're $2 or $3. I'll probably put them on our website at some point. Yeah. So the most important thing after rebuilding a carb on an engine that you don't know anything about is to always set the carb to factory specs. So usually Vitarazi has in their user manual, right, and then the service manual.
Yeah, you did
Oh,
that's right.
They gave us a wing-way go. Nice.
So anyway, step number one is to reset the carb to factory settings always. If you have anything that's going on, if you're at this altitude and you change something at home and it doesn't work here, set it to factory values. On a Moster, the low jet is quarter turn out to 1 turn out. If you're at sea level, it's closer to quarter turn. If you're, well, it depends. It depends on the engine. It depends on where you are. And the biggest issue with tuning a Moster carb or any other engine that has a WG, WB, W, whatever, Walbro carbs that are the bumpers, is the low jet adjustment is so sensitive that when you turn it as little as you physically possibly can, you can actually swing it from too rich to too lean. So it's super, super sensitive. So if you're out there and you do like an eighth of a turn or half a turn to adjust it, you're out of spec. Put it to quarter turn. I'll share the most common thing I see, and almost everybody does this. I'll see the idle adjustment spring completely squished. So what people are doing and what instructors are doing and what service centers are doing is they'll have the low jet too rich and they'll compensate by turning in the idle adjust all the way until bottoms out. So one of the first things I do when I tune an engine is I back off the idle jet or the idle speed adjustment screw to relieve that spring. I want to actually see space between the coils, so it's kind of within a reasonable range. And I set the low jet to factory spec. I fire up the engine and then I see what it does.
What's factory spec? It's 15 to 20 minutes out. Is that right?
Correct.
Quarter turn to one third of a turn.
It's easier. I think with working with folks, talking about minutes on a clock is a bit easier for folks to understand. So the 15 minutes to 20 minutes is the factory spec for the Moster on the low screw. High screw is actually 78 minutes. You really, if you're flying sea level all the time, and then maybe you come up to a fly-in here, you really don't need to mess with the high screw that much. If this is your home where you're flying 5,000-6,000 feet or above all the time, then yeah, you may need to play with that high screw. But for a weekend at a fly-in, I wouldn't mess with it because for a lot of folks, it's just getting into a treacherous territory there. If you're not totally sure what you're doing there, there's no real need to mess with it. At sea level, that high screw is really, really forgiving on the mixture. What was I going to say? Oh, if the only way your motor will continue to run, if you haven't rebuilt that carb in 2 years or so, is to basically almost close off the low screw entirely, and you have that idle adjustment pegged all the way to the bottom. You got to rebuild your carburetor. Those diaphragms are not working anymore, and those are all telltale signs that your car is long due for a rebuild.
So let's do a quick recap. You bought an engine off marketplace, it doesn't run. I would always say,
Check the spark
do
plug.
the dumb stuff. Spark plug, spark plug. I totally missed spark plug. Of course, spark plug.
That's your first line of defense.
Always do the dumb stuff first. Rip out the fuel system, clean lines, no weird no heat gun to whatever, no weird clips, no zip ties. There's a way to use zip ties correctly to make it seal, whatever. Clean lines, nice clamps on the ends, no air bubbles at all. You should never have air bubbles in your fuel line. This is another controversial thing. You should never have air bubbles in your fuel line after your engine's run for a while. If you're idling and you're getting little bubbles that are forming and going into your carb, there's something wrong with the fuel line somewhere. Another thing to check is the fuel line where it attaches inside the tank, because you're connecting it to a nipple. There's another line that attaches to the nipple to the fuel filter. So you have to replace that fuel line as well, annually, biannually, let's say twice or every 2 years. That has, fair enough. I almost said biannually, which is different, whatever.
That's twice a year.
So, rebuild your carb. I'll show you in a little bit how to tune a carb the old school way, which is by feel. And I'll show you how to do it. There's other ways to do it. There's great videos. There's one by Scout that's pretty good that teaches you how to set the low jet. But I'll show you how to do it the old school way that is foolproof, where you can do it on any engine at any altitude and do it just by feel and by ear. So the next step is you might have a gasket leak. So one thing that I like to do is pull off the entire intake, replace all the gaskets in the intake to make sure everything seals, check the reeds, and all that stuff. And hopefully at that point you've replaced enough of the dumb stuff that your engine's going to at least run and work correctly. Anybody have any questions?
Do you think those stone fuel filters are the better ones than the old style fiber ones? Like the Bitterozzi and Unimox and stuff. It's like that white.
The Porex.
The Porex.
Forex, okay, yeah.
Is it? Oh, then like fiber inside of a container?
Like,
You talking about that yellow paper filter?
Well, my old clunk had like a metal band on it and had like that.
Is this on a Maverick?
Yeah, it was like cotton with a
Yeah, it was
little
like a
metal
cotton
band.
filter.
This was on a Maverick?
This is an Adam 80.
On a Maverick.
A Maverick, yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
they were, I don't know what filters they were using. They've gone since gone away from that, doing just the Forex filters. Forex filters are pretty hard to beat. We use the Polini immersion filter on the Limitless just to be able to find the tank, bottom of the tank better. It works to capillary reaction too. They were pretty good.
One thing I'll mention about the Forex.
Plugs that are stainless steel with a little very thin.
Looks like a spring or something, right? Yeah. Somebody was showing me those the other day. Those look like those would work really well too.
They make two versions. They make one that has a spring in it and one that doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, as long as it's heavy and it filters good. Yeah, those.
No air bubbles.
No air bubbles. I'll mention a couple of things about fuel filters. First of all, on Amazon, there are fake Forex filters that will disintegrate. As they disintegrate, that goes into your fuel line, into your carb, and clogs the screens.
The rebuild carbs as well, or rebuild kits on Amazon.
Yeah, rebuild
are
kits.
Very sketchy too. Yeah. I found them when they punch the diaphragms out, there's still chunks of the diaphragm missing, or still didn't get punched all the way through, so it's blocking off the pulse port sometimes, just stuff like that. The diaphragm material is totally incorrect, so the function of the carb's doesn't work anyway. Yeah, genuine Walbro rebuild kits are absolutely the way to go. They're not that expensive.
NGK spark plugs on Amazon have a lot of counterfeits. NGK spark plugs for a Moster, we use BR9ES. There are two. One of them is incorrect. BR9ES solid tip has a different part number than one that has a little aluminum tip that screws on. One issue with the screw on, Jim, thank you for the idea. There's a little aluminum screw on tip on some of the plugs. It is not compatible with our connectors. What happens is the connector, when it's popped on, it moves around a lot, and eventually we'll start grinding through it. And what happens is you get aluminum dust in there, and the ignition system will arc through that. It will turn into carbon over time. So if you pop off your connector and a bunch of black stuff comes out, you're eventually going to develop ignition issues, and it's going to start cutting out. So you want to replace that connector, run a solid tip plug with a different part number, and keep in mind, again, Amazon can have counterfeit NGK plugs. Doesn't matter, probably not. If you have an air conception engine, you have a counterfeit Walbro carb. The seat for the metering lever is a different height than a genuine one. So if you have an air conception that is not running well, you cannot use the Walbro gauge to set the height correctly. You have to be really careful. I don't know what the number is. You have to find out for yourself what the right number is and actually measure it on that engine, or any of those engines. So be careful.
Iridium spark plugs. What's your take? I think it came with my factory, right? So
That was my situation. What?
Iridium plugs are designed to work for extended period of time in cars. Our service intervals for replacement are fractions of that time. They're tiny. So we're swapping plugs long before any of that takes effect. You should probably always use OEM parts on your engines anyways. Are you gonna get screwed if you don't put an iridium plug in? No. On any engine, it doesn't make any difference. Neil, what's your opinion?
I don't think it makes any difference, but exactly what you said. That's where your motor came with. That's what it's been tested with. It's like, what, $6 versus $2? Like, is it really that big of a deal? Can you use a regular plug in a pinch? Yeah, of course, but...
Well, the main reason I ask is the factory R came with an iridium.
That's what I'm saying. That's
Okay,
that's
yeah.
the way it's been tested. Same with Upholstery FI came with iridium plugs. Cosmos, I believe, comes with iridium plugs. You can run regular plugs in it, it'll be just fine, but
If you got a plus, you can raise your rating.
it's...
Cosmos comes with a regular plug.
I found both.
In the
I've had both.
Just the word iridium, it's kind of cool.
It's cool, yeah. But it's like, you know, do you want to stick with the thing that machine has been extensively tested with because you want to save $4 or whatever? Like, I mean, as long as the heat range is fine, that's the most important part is the heat range. If you're running the wrong heat range in it, that 8 or 7 or 8 or 9, that's the heat range number. You stick a 9 in there for NGK, that's their heat range number. That's the most important part.
I want to touch. Oh, go ahead.
VR.
VR9ES on Mosters and Adams and Cosmos.
Factory R.
Okay, with
And
the
factory
solid
history of
With
that.
the
Solid tip,
tip,
yes.
yeah.
Solid tip.
And there are some. There's an NGK USA
Specifically,
dealer
we're trying to
that
find a
has
plug.
those
Well,
specifically.
if you buy it
Say again?
from
There is an
Squish,
NGK USA dealer that's like I can't remember out of the Midwest.
If you buy it on
deal.
Amazon,
Oh, so it's direct out of factory.
Sorry, is there a quick way to be able to tell if you got a fake
The box.
No idea.
Honestly, you could probably email NGK and they may even answer you directly if it's a counterfeit or not.
You know, there's like a way to see it, look at it, and know.
Probably the box is what's going to be the giveaway. That's usually what the giveaway is on other counterfeit stuff is the box. It'll look just a little bit different. That's other than that. I mean
Counterfeiters
the
get better
non-seller.
every year.
Yeah.
A lot of times they're
Like
good.
basically saying.
Not even bad.
It might not even matter. Now, on an air conception, again, with that wallboard carb, it does matter because you have to actually physically set it up completely differently, and that's a big problem.
Same factory.
It's true. The air conception started using the knockoff carb a few years ago. Yeah, the thickness of the button on the metering diaphragm, the depth of it, if you take a set of calipers and measure it, it's like, I think it's 20 thousandths different, which is going to make a
Huge
major difference in how that machine runs.
In that case, it is your pop-off pressure.
Yeah.
You missed that part.
Oh, you didn't.
My
Pop-off
motto
pressure,
is it is never the pop-off pressure. Almost never. There are cases, but generally that is not your problem. It is a tuning issue usually.
It's
or maybe
usually a tuning issue. Usually a tuning issue or carb not set up correctly. Usually a tuning issue. That's like 90% of our problems is tuning issue.
So I mentioned a couple of things that are often forgotten, which is the intake fuel filter. That was a critical one. Another thing that's never checked is reads. Every 50, 100 hours, you should definitely check your reads. Again, it's in the service manual how you do it.
Factory R especially. Factory R is those carbon. They're a little bit different reed material. Those chip pretty regularly, semi-regularly, I should say.
Are you just mainly looking for chips, or also that they don't lay flat and seal? Like, what's your what's the process you go
at
through?
a set interval. They should always be replaced at a set interval, and that is preventative. So you can go double, triple on a lot of these things, but I certainly have. I've not replaced a plug for 150 hours or whatever. But preventatively, you do it at the interval, so it doesn't happen to you, basically. I mentioned it, those items. Intake gaskets are super important because if you have any sort of a leak, it will present itself in two ways. Number one is it will feel like your engine is running lean, which means it's getting air sucked in. But the issue with it is oftentimes it doesn't happen when your engine is cold. So you might run up your engine, tune it, and it's perfect, and then you go fly for an hour, you come back, and your prop is spinning at idle, and it's revving up higher than it should, and it doesn't want to settle down until it cools off. So what happens is the metal expands, but the gaskets have a leak, and then it allows that air to start seeping through those gaskets. So I usually just replace the whole stack, torque it to spec, after rebuilding the carb, and that solves most of you. Reset it to factory settings that will solve most of the issues that we have.
What if you get the opposite problem where you're spinning a lot, and then once it gets hot, it stops?
I'll touch base on tuning stuff.
Okay.
Quick question on the intake side. I'll use, it's not RTV, it's better stuff, but I put that stuff in for extra insurance. What are your thoughts? Apparently not.
There's nothing wrong with it. There's no reason not to. The material that's used is like a weird Teflon gasket material. Those things are super, super nice gaskets. Like compared to rubber gaskets, paper gaskets that are used in other engines, those are super nice.
They're very, very reusable. They will leave very little residue. You can kind of knock a little bit of it off with your fingernail, but I reuse that stuff pretty regularly.
Yeah, you
As
can
long
get
as
away.
it doesn't
Yeah.
get torn up, it's usually pretty okay.
I want to touch base really quick on kind of deeper level maintenance, really, really fast, because this is missed a lot. Say you're flying, you melt a piston. A lot of people will go, okay, you just pop the cylinder off and replace it. And anytime I see a post on the internet of somebody saying, hey, I just rebuilt this engine or whatever, I'm rebuilding this engine, my question always is, did you check the squish gap? And the response almost always is a blank stare, or a question like, what is a squish gap? It is a really, really important setting, and Vittorazzi sets it with a stack of gaskets below the cylinder. So first of all, what is the squish band? You have your cylinder, which is a cylinder, and now you have a piston inside, and you have your cylinder head, which is it's a dome. Now on the dome, towards the edges of the cylinder, there are flat spots that match the profile of the cylinder because the cylinder is also domed. So that little band that runs around is called the squish gap. That squish gap is super, super important on two-strokes. What you're doing is you're creating turbulence inside the cylinder to help the fuel mixture mix. That setting also changes the engine's compression, so it can drastically affect how an engine operates if you don't set it. Now, if you're doing certain types of maintenances, like if you're just replacing a piston, nothing else, you can get away with seeing what gaskets are in there, measuring them, putting the same ones in. However, if you replace the cylinder, if you replace the crankshaft, if you replace whatever, cylinder head, you have to manually set the squish gap, which comes with a whole procedure that is pretty difficult to do, so you have to do it. Again, the way it's adjusted is using the gaskets below. When you get a gasket kit from Vittorazzi, there's going to be like 5-6 different thicknesses of gaskets, and you stack them until you reach a specific value of clearance at the top. And the way you would measure that clearance, my tent is probably float away. The way you measure that clearance, there's a couple ways to do it. There are these strips that you squish, and then you can measure the strips. You can also do it with rosin flux solder, where you take a piece of solder, you bend it into an L, and you put it in the spark plug hole, and you basically put it in the side of the cylinder so it's parallel with the piston pin, and then you turn the engine over to make sure that solder gets squished by the piston.
You dry assemble that too with no gaskets initially, right? So you
Right.
dry stack everything.
So what you do is you put the gaskets in that you think you should have.
Oh, okay. You
put the engine completely back together and torque the cylinder head to spec. And then you put the L in there, and then you turn the engine over. There's videos to do this.
Yeah.
The one important thing is you have to do it either aligned with the pin or in a T, so you're hitting both sides, because the piston can rock. So you want to do it aligned with the pin, so you're squishing it where it's in the center, not on one of the edges of the piston to change that clearance. Anyway, that's a lot of words.
You said in light of the pin. You're saying on the
Wrist pin.
The wrist pin on the piston is the axis.
Yep.
If you put it on the front or the back and you try to squish it, the piston will just
rock.
So you're going to have a much bigger clearance than you're actually trying to measure. If you do it in line with the pin, it's going to be close enough to measure. There's a spec, it's in the service manual, it's around 1.5 millimeters. There's a range. There's a range that will be specified in your manual. Super important. If it's too tight, you can have an engine that makes a little bit more power, but it can also overheat. If it's too loose, you're going to lose power. You can also overheat from having it too loose, depending on how loose it is. It can drastically change how your engine operates, and you can have issues with your engine that you're going to have a really hard time diagnosing if you screw that one up. Does anybody have any questions about that? Let me see what I got. For the others.